Welcome to the 17th meeting of the Subcommittee of International Human Rights. Today is October 28th, Friday. We have several guests here in person, witnesses, and several participating by Zoom today. This is a hybrid meeting, and pursuant to the order of June 23rd, 2022, we're meeting in the hybrid fashion. For the benefit of witnesses and members, I ask you to please wait until you're acknowledged by me, the speaker, by me, the chair, before speaking. There's interpretation for those of you who need it. You can have interpretation either English or French just by clicking on the globe icon on the bottom of your screen for those participating by Zoom. Any comments that are made should be addressed through the chair. Today, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by this committee on Friday, September 23rd, we are going to resume our study on Tigray.
Mr. Chair, can I bring up a point of order, please?
I'll just continue with my first introductory remarks.
Thank you.
If that's okay. Before welcoming the witnesses, I would like to provide a trigger warning. This is a difficult study. We will be discussing experiences related to mental health. This may trigger viewers, those who are viewing and watching live. And we're asking viewers, members, or staff with experiences that are traumatizing that if you feel distressed or need help, please advise a clerk. Ms. McPherson.
Mr. Chair, yesterday we received a very troubling letter from the United Tiguru Canada regarding some of the witnesses scheduled to be at today's meeting. And I wrote to you, but I did not receive a response. And I had asked you to cancel today's session so that we could, as a committee, discuss our witness lists. But we are here now, so I'm raising this point of order publicly. The details in the letter we received are alarming. It is extremely problematic that our committee might give platform to individuals that or organizations who are publicly circulating concerning remarks about Tigrayans, and in some cases may even amount to hate speech. Our committee has the responsibility to provide a safe environment to all witnesses who are invited to testify, and I do not believe that we have met the standard today. And this is deeply troubling to me.
I'd like to thank you, Ms. McPherson, for that extremely important remark. And we, as a committee, I ask that we ensure that whatever witnesses we bring forth contribute to our discussion to find truth wherever it lies. We all have the opportunity to ask the pointed questions that we need to ask when witnesses are appearing, and that's our full right as members. I ask us all to employ that right. Ms. McPherson.
Mr. Chair, I believe that by having witnesses on this panel that will make our other witnesses feel unsafe, it limits our ability to get the testimony that we require. I'm deeply concerned that the way that this panel has been set up is very, very problematic. I don't see how we can continue.
Ms. Vanderbilt.
I think we should ensure that the panelists are the ones that have that choice if they want to continue or not. Maybe, Mr. Chair, if the panelists wish to continue, I think we should give them voice. If they're not comfortable, I think we also need to respect that.
With this, I'd ask that if any panelists are not comfortable, that they confidentially tell the clerk so. Yes, Mr.
Well, there's really a problem here, Mr. Chairperson. how do you want a witness to feel comfortable in a confidential manner when everybody's listening to them? It's too late. The game is up. This is a fait accompli. I would suggest that we adjourn the debate today. We call the witnesses back at a later stage. I don't think that they should feel like they can't speak openly now. I think we should come back with a quote-unquote far safer panel going forward. I can't find the words. I'm not in a good mood this morning. I'll put it out there. This is really insensitive, what's going on here. I really am lost for words, Mr. Chairperson. I'm angry. I'm really angry this morning. I don't want this to happen to our witnesses. I think we should adjourn the debate, go back and do our homework here, and pick things up where we left off down the track. I'm sorry that the witnesses have travelled to get here, but I'm sure that they understand the thrust of my message. We can't put pressure on them right here and now, and, I think that would be unfortunate and wrong.
Yes.
May I request a short suspension, and then that would allow the panelists and members to confer?
We'll suspend for 5 minutes so that panelists can confidentially go to the clerk. If I hear anything back, then we'll deal with that situation as it arises. So we're suspending for 5 minutes. 1 second. You don't have this floor.
No,
and
I don't.
Therefore, please wait till you recognize. To thank everybody for being here, and we are going to continue as scheduled. We have today 3 groups and 1 person coming as individual. First off, we have the Coalition of Eritrean Canadian Communities with Lambro. My apologies on the pronunciation of names. With Lambros Kyriakos, chairperson appearing by video. Herman Giddy, a researcher also appearing by video. From the Etho-Canadian Network for Advocacy and Support, Tihat Asfau, President. Mr. Jamire, Vice Chair, Ottawa Chapter. Warku Abera, Professor by video conference. Jeff Pierce, journalist and author. As an individual, we have Mukesh Kapila, Professor Emeritus, Global Health and Humanitarian Affairs, University of Manchester. The final group, Security and Justice for Tukrains, Canada. Kidan Gabri-Mariam, President and Social Worker. Britawit Aref Farine. Please, when you're also speaking, introduce yourself with proper pronunciation. Accountant. Dr. Abel Gide Kabidam, medical doctor. Fevin Mulugeta, nurse. We will start off with, everyone has 6 minutes of the 4 groups, 6 minutes sharp. We'll start off with the Coalition of Eritrean Canadian Communities and Organizations. For 6 minutes, please.
Honorable members, first let me thank you for giving the Coalition of the Eritrean Canadian Communities and Organizations, SACO, the opportunity to brief your esteemed committee. We are appearing for a second time to your esteemed community. Canada relations with Eritrean people can be traced to the 80s. Canada supported the Eritrean Relief Association, which worked in liberated areas in Eritrea. In the early 2000s, Canada was also one of the true contributing countries to the United Nations mission to Ethiopia and Eritrea. The Canadian forces in UNME were performing peacekeeping operations in 1998 during the Ethiopian-Eritrean border war. In 2018, Prime Minister Abiy set a clear and unequivocal signal to the international community, and more importantly to Eritrea, that he was serious about Ethiopia accepting the ruling of the Eritrean-Ethiopia Boundary Commission, which awarded Badme to Eritrea. President Isaias Afwerki responded to this by sending a delegation to Addis Ababa for the first time since the 90s. This paved the way for establishing diplomatic relations and the signing of the Eritrean-Ethiopian Peace Friendship Agreement in Asmara, July 9, 2018. This ushered in a new era of peace, ending 2 decades of what came to be known as no war, no peace. The euphoria surrounding the peace agreement expressed by the people of Eritrea and Ethiopia was nothing like the region had experienced before. There was overwhelming joy and hope. Families were united, borders were open, and phone lines were operationally, finally allowing families and friends to call each other and connect between the two countries. But there is a serious questions that the people of Eritrea and Ethiopia ask themselves. Why didn't this peace happen sooner? And the answer was the TPLF, who stood in the peace for nearly 2 decades by illegally occupying sovereign Eritrean territory in violation of the international law, and specifically the 2002 ruling agreement of the Ethiopian-Eritrean Border Commission. Honorable members, we find ourselves again faced with an obstacle to peace in the TPLF. It has caused death and destruction in Ethiopia and is determined to tear the Horn of Africa apart. It triggered the war in November of 2020 against the federal government of Ethiopia and sought to internationalize the conflict by launching at least 15 missiles targeting urban areas in Eritrea, including Asmara, totally unprovoked. It is in this historical context that we have come to urge your esteemed committee to consider the constructive role of Canada could play in the Horn of Africa. On November 12, 1984, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Declaration of the Rights of Peoples to Peace, where they recognize life without war serves as the primary international prerequisite for the material well-being, development, and progress of countries, and for the full implementation of the rights and fundamental human freedoms proclaimed by the United Nations. Those who trigger wars should be held accountable and brought to justice, and peace should prevail. In order to get the Horn of Africa back to track to peace, we ask your esteemed committee to give serious consideration to the following 3 points. The 2018 Peace and Friendship Agreement signed between Ethiopia and Eritrea, anchored on the ruling of the Eritrea-Ethiopia Boundary Commission, should be supported. Canada should condemn TPLF unprovoked November 2020 attack against Ethiopian National Defense Forces and against Eritrea. TPLF represents an immediate and existential threat to the peace and security in the Horn of Africa. Foreign state and non-state actors who support the arm the TPLF should be condemned. Foreign support to TPLF has fueled the conflict and emboldened the TPLF to continue offensive attacks. Honorable members, we are committed to working with this committee to support your efforts in shaping Canada's role for peace in the Horn of Africa as a catalyst for development and human rights. I'm going to pass to my co-worker, Herman Gide, for the rest of the 3 minutes. Thank you so much.
In the remaining minute and a half, please.
Oh, sorry.
Hello, everybody. My name is Hermon, and I will shorten my statement to just brief sentences here. First of all, I am from the Horn of Africa, and as a Black woman, I can relate to the people of Tigray, and particularly to the women of Tigray. No one's more interested in peace in this region than us, because it has tremendous consequences on the Horn of Africa. And as a relatively new country, Eritrea's interest is in peace, development, and partnership. Second, as the New Africa Institute in New York has identified, the TPLF disinformation network is composed of 6 stages. And essentially, each of these stages describes how the TPLF uses Western allies and agents to disseminate propaganda and shape global public opinion. For example, in the first stage, TPLF leaders serve as a primary starting point of disinformation. And for example, former Ethiopian ambassador under the TPLF, Ambassador Wendimu, leaked talking points to William Davidson of the International Crisis Group on behalf of the Tigray Friendship Liaison Office. Similarly, Mulgeta Gabrahiwot, a TPLF member, briefs Alex DeWall of the World Peace Foundation on battlefield conditions in Tigray. Both William Davidson and Alex DeWall have written extensively on the war in northern Ethiopia. Their work has been cited by major international online and print media, shaping global public opinion. Then second stage, there's a development of a pro-TPLF narrative. When they're briefed by TPLF operatives, the very same Western contacts publish TPLF version of events in unconfirmed reports through their social media accounts and blogs. Some of these blogs and sites include the External Program of Africa and Eritrean Hub and World Peace Foundation. And the third stage, TPLF creates the facts on the ground that supports the narrative. An example of this is a CNN video of the Dengalat villager in Tigray being coached on what to say for video cameras. The village of Dengalat was the site where TPLF alleged Eritrean soldiers committed a massacre. Nima Al-Gabir of CNN admitted on air that she relies on a network.
Point out, Mr. President.
On a point of order, Mr. Chairperson. No, Mr. Chairperson. On a point of order.
Brunel Duceppe.
Well, I didn't interrupt proceedings to date, but this was really tough for the interpreters throughout the entire testimony because perhaps there were other microphones turned on in the room or in the video conferencing setup. We have to be more careful because it was very tough, apparently, for the interpreters, and we know what kind of work our interpreters do, so please be mindful of that. Thank you, Mr. Brunel Duceppe. And on that note, we will proceed with the next witnesses.
More of a chance to share what you want to share just now with us through questions and answers. We'll continue next to Security and Justice for Tigrayans, Canada, for 6 minutes, please. And I'll give a hand signal when we approach 1 minute. I'll put a single digit up like this. I'll put a single digit up like this when we have 1 minute left, and this for 30 seconds, okay? Please, for 6 minutes, go ahead.
Good morning, respected Parliament members, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Abel Gide Khabadom, a recent immigrant from Tigray, Ethiopia. I'm a married man and have 2 kids. Up until January 2021, I served as a medical doctor in one of the largest hospitals in Ethiopia, Eider Comprehensive Specialized Hospital, which is the largest hospital served as a referral for the Tigrayan region. And I'm one of the first witnesses of the war, which began in November 2020. I would start my speech by asking a question. The question is, imagine you have 2 kids. One of your kids was diagnosed to have diabetes mellitus, and the other one diagnosed to have cancer. And you are told there is no medicine for both of them. So I would like to compile my speech into of the circumstances in 3. The first thing that happened in Tigray was the mass destruction, the destruction and mass killings. The airstrikes, drone attacks, heavy shells all contributed to the mass killings and destruction of the city. It got intensified as the Ethiopian National Defense Force and the Eritrean army approached to conquer the capital. Especially a day before, there were heavy shells ongoing the whole day long. I have seen 15 to 20 dead bodies and numerous injured people coming from the city. Unfortunately, 4 of them were from the same family, both children, father and mother. I was one of the first people to photograph everyone and present it to the international community. There were atrocities and unlawful killings on the streets of Mekelle. I had to walk over shrouded bodies every morning in the emergency OPD. The second circumstance that was happening was the siege and lack of basic medical services. I have noticed suffering of children, gasping units due to lack of oxygen, misery of cancer, diabetic patients. I have seen women dying because of hemorrhage, trying to deliver under tree. The third circumstance is the rape and sexual violence. I had to hear unbelievable and unbearable stories of ladies with gang rape. Most of them were raped in front of their husband and children, where their husband was killed at the scene. As a physician, the most important lesson I learned in life is how much human life costs. I had to spend days and nights to heal the soul of one human body. But I really wonder why the people, why the international community, why the world is ignoring the misery of 6 million people under the siege. Thank you very much.
And the remaining time you still have, you can pass it on to your colleagues.
Is Bertai Tarafina. I'm from Tigray, immigrated to Canada in 2009 and became a Canadian citizen in 2015. First, I would like to thank you, the committee, for giving me the chance. On early November 2020, when the war broke out on Tigray, towns had been targeted with heavy shelling, and my brother, Mauratu, left the town with his 2 young girls and his pregnant wife to her aunt in the nearby village. Weeks later, they ran out of food, and he came back home on December 10th to grab some food and clothes, but never made it back to his children. He was taken the next morning by Eritrean soldiers with 4 other men from the neighborhood. Days passed, but no one returned home. And the Eritrean soldiers refused to answer questions about their whereabouts. Then the family decided to go by foot to Aksum, 20 kilometers, to ask the Ethiopian general to help them locate the missing men. The Ethiopian general sent 2 Ethiopian soldiers to escort the families back to Oromarai. The Ethiopian soldiers, the Eritrean, that they had the orders from the Ethiopian general. Then the Eritreans agreed and took them to the mountains outside of the city, showed them the dead bodies of all 5 men. And my brother was one of them. They were found with their hands tied and behind their back, and their legs were bound. All had been shot, and rocks had been placed on their heads. They were buried 8 days later. My uncle, Tamrat, the most loved person by our family and very popular for his kindness, was one of the over 800 civilians who were killed by Eritrean soldiers on the streets of Aksum on November 28 and 29, 2020. Days later, one of our family members found him on the street. He was buried 3 days later. He left 2 young girls behind. Similar, my cousin Yirga was a teacher in the town of Shira. Neighbors told my aunt he was shot by Eritrean sniper at his doorstep when they arrived at town. My other cousin, who grew up with me in the same house, was a teacher and a farmer in my Kadra, escaped the very first massacre, but his house and business burned down. Vigilante. Thank God he's alive. He took his wife and 2 boys to Shira. They had nothing other than the clothes on their back, and they couldn't travel to my family in Aksum because they had no money for transport, and he had to leave them back, and he had to travel on top of a minibus for free and borrow money from my mom, had to come back and grab his family back to Aksum. So thank you for listening.
Thank you for sharing your testimony with us, and we'll have more time in questions and answers. Next, as an individual, we'll have Mukesh Kapila, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for inviting me to speak to your committee. The last time I had the honor to address the honorable parliamentarians of Canada was in relation to the Darfur genocide some 20 years ago. And here we are again, where never again is happening again, this time in the Tigray region of Ethiopia. I speak on this tragic matter from the perspective of experience with comparable situations. I was the first British government official to enter Rwanda in 1994 during the 100 days of killings to witness at first hand what a genocide looks like. I recall comparing notes subsequently with that great son of Canada, your former Senator, Lieutenant General Romeo Dallaire, who headed the United Nations forces in Rwanda. And not long afterwards, I had a ringside seat to the atrocities in Bosnia-Herzegovina, culminating in the Srebrenica genocide. Then, as Special Advisor to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, I was in Cambodia to examine the long and toxic aftermath to the 1975 genocide. Subsequently, in 2003-2004, I headed the United Nations in Sudan, trying to stop the Darfur genocide that unfolded on my watch. Sadly, we never prevented any of these genocides, although we had ample warning of them and could track their nasty progression in minute detail in real time. So we could not claim ignorance of these matters. The same is happening now in Tigray, where others will have testified before you on the depths of brutality and depravity being plumbed. My professional assessment is clear, based on my experience of nearly 30 years of international war and peace efforts. Progressive acts of genocide are being perpetrated by the governments and agents of the states of Eritrea and Ethiopia against Tigrayans. I assert this categorically for the following reasons. First is the orchestration of the violence on Tigrayans through the use of dehumanizing hate speech through Ethiopia's state communication channels, as well as state-encouraged social media. Second is a pattern of violence being experienced by Tigrayans. This includes direct attacks on civilians and mass rapes. It includes induced starvation, malnutrition, epidemic risk, and disease progression through deliberate Ethiopian blockade of humanitarian relief, food, and medicine. This is complemented by the systematic destruction of urban and rural livelihoods, including through cutting off electricity, internet, and banking. As these efforts are not targeted on combatants, but generally, consequently, they are violations of humanitarian law, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Third is the systematization of these crimes to the Ethiopian and Eritrean authorities' command and control structures and their official capacities. This imputes intent as well as proactive commission, not random acts of violence that can occur in the fog of war. Mr. Chairman, the Genocide Convention was defined in the aftermath of the Holocaust in the 1940s. Our world has changed immeasurably in the subsequent 70 plus years, and we must interpret the convention in today's context and realities. And so putting together the pattern of the multifaceted violence in Tigray in this, the second decade of the millennium, it is my conviction that the situation in Tigray is nothing less than a genocide. Of course, there are many deniers. Denial is a hallmark of genocide, as we know from their history. Also, there are apologists and distractors who argue that the conflict has complex causes and atrocities have been committed on both sides. That may be true, probably is true. But as we saw in Second World War Europe, soldiers on all sides did terrible things, but the genocide was committed only by the Nazis against Jews. Similarly, all groups suffered from violence in Rwanda, but the genocide was only against the Tutsi. And so too here. All of Ethiopia is suffering, including the Amhara and the Oromo, but the genocide is only against Tigrayans. Mr. Chairman, war is not illegal. Sometimes it is even necessary, civil war or across boundaries. But the acts of commissions of crimes against humanity is always illegal, and especially genocide. To test my assertion, we could ask the UN Security Council to rule or refer the matter to the International Criminal Court. But that's not going to happen anytime soon due to the paralyzing UN geopolitics and restricted referral rules to ICC. African regional mechanisms for accountability are similarly handicapped. But that should not paralyze the planet. Genocide is a crime of universal jurisdiction, and all states have a duty to use their domestic legal systems to investigate it. Canada's courts could also do that. It would be good to get such legal determination that parliamentarians are the supreme lawmakers in democratic states like Canada, where you've already declared the repression of the Uyghurs in China as a genocide. And I would urge parliamentarians in Canada to consider such an inquiry and for you to make your own determination. Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, the explicit recognition of a genocide is important, not because we can prevent it, but to mitigate its worst effects so that humanity can rise again. And that's why it's important that we don't keep on talking about the causes of the conflict and who attacked who first and so on. That may or may not be relevant. But genocide, the commissioning of acts against humanity and crimes against humanity is something that every country in the world and all legislatures in the world have a duty to do something about. And I believe that you, Mr. Chairman, and your colleagues have a prime duty in the democracy that you are supreme lawmakers of, to act through the mechanism that you have so that we can put an end to the inhumanities that we're seeing in and around Tigray. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And for the final group, and I ask those who are participating by Zoom to keep an eye on whether or not your time is coming to an end. To start for 6 minutes, the Ethno-Canadian Network for Advocacy and Support, please, for 6 minutes.
Mr. Chair, honorable members, thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. Let me be clear. The immense suffering of Ethiopians can be laid at the feet of the TPLF. For 27 years, it ruled the country through terror, committed atrocities throughout the country, and never held a free and fair election. It is a deposed and aggrieved former political party that launched terrorist attacks on the state and has been engaged in a well-resourced and long-planned insurgency and disinformation war. We would like to offer the following recommendations for your consideration. 1. Redesignate TPLF as a terrorist group. Before this conflict, the US and Canada rightfully considered it a terrorist organization. There are numerous pieces of evidence TPLF committing terrorist acts such as torture, sexual violence, and murder of civilians, as well as soldiers. TPLF spokesperson even admitted on regional television that its forces attacked federal military outposts and thousands of national troops on November 3rd and 4th, 2020. 2. Send a delegation to Ethiopia to assess the issues of the ongoing conflict with first-hand evidence. If you check news articles before 2020, you will find credible reports of how the TPLF embezzled millions of dollars in aid from the Ethiopian people. They have used some of these stolen funds to run their propaganda campaign and bribe members of Congress, of which there is proof. For a proper evidence-based account, we recommend the committee refer to the articles of Professor Anne Fitzgerald of the Balsillie School of International Affairs. 3. Canadian constitutional experts should support the review of Ethiopia's constitution to help ameliorate ethnic tensions. The TPLF ratified a constitution in 1994 that has been compared by some to apartheid in South Africa. It sowed the seeds of discontent and has inspired horrible ethnic divisions. Canada could help enormously by supporting a new draft of a constitution that recognizes individual rights, regardless of tribe or ethnicity. Thank you. I will stop here and allow Jeff Pierce to speak.
Okay.
Mr. Pierce, in approximately 3 minutes.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. I traveled to Ethiopia on 2 separate occasions last year to visit the war zones and wrote articles and made video reports for 2 Ethiopian networks, Belagaro TV and Arts TV. It's not enough to go look. You have to understand the background of what you're looking at. The TPLF have routinely used their operatives as fixers for gullible Western journalists, showing them only what they want to be seen and steering them to their narrative. I can cite you the example of a British reporter for a major magazine who smugly flew off to Tigray and didn't even bother to learn Ethiopia's basic essential history until after he returned to Europe. He advertised on Twitter for experts to help him. I do have a reasonable understanding of the history, and what I saw was appalling. Both the mainstream media and Amnesty International based their reportage of the Maikadra massacre in late 2020 on long-distance phone calls with sources they couldn't possibly verify and never visited the place. Virtually none of them went there. My colleague, photojournalist Jamal Countess, was one of the first to go there for Getty Images, and I later went there. My team interviewed survivors, a few of whom could name their assailants, agents of SAMRI, the TPLF youth wing, by name. During my trips, I visited IDP camps and spoke to witnesses and survivors, and while Western media keeps calling this the war in Tigray and Tigray under siege, when the TPLF were well beyond Tigray's borders, I saw what the rebels did to the Amhara and Afar regions. I toured a hospital where operating tables, ultrasound equipment, drugs, and oxygen plant were stolen and facilities vandalized. I saw a university where a whole COVID lab was stolen and every computer drive taken, where the floors were landscapes of broken glass. I walked through a museum where TPLF soldiers defecated on the floor and stole priceless artifacts. I was there. And people in Afar have been asking, why are aid trucks going through our region up to Mekelle while TPLF are allowed to harm and kill us? It is easy. It is too convenient to reflexively say, oh, it's both sides. It isn't. Given more time, I could lay out for you in meticulous detail the overwhelming bias shown for 2 years by the Western media, but I want to bring to your attention the set of internal UN communications leaked to me by sources that I've included in my additional documents. There is also an additional document, which I understand won't get to you until next week, which offers the hate speech of one of your speakers, Mukesh Kapila. They show conclusively in these UN documents that UN staff have not only looked the other way as the TPLF committed war crimes, but have even lied to the world about their help in restoring telecoms to the Tigray region. I hope you will review them carefully. And I urge you to do the right thing by Ethiopia and not let a terrorist group rewrite history and an ancient nation's destiny. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will now continue into our panel and allow the members to ask questions to the witnesses. We're going to start off with Mr. Viersen for 7 minutes. Mr. Viersen, you have 6.5 minutes. We can't hear you, Mr. Viersen. Yes.
Oh, no. Put it in again. Here we go. What we do know, Mr. Chair, is that lives are being taken in Ethiopia. What we do know is murder seems to be on the rise there. We know that there's a conflict happening, and we know we have reports of human rights abuses across northern Ethiopia. What I don't think this committee is here to point fingers at who started this. What we're here to do is hold people that are doing, recognizing how do we hold people that are committing these atrocities, how do we hold them to account, and how do we bring an end to the violence that is happening in Ethiopia. So I'd like to just start with Mr. Pierce. It's interesting. I was looking at your Twitter presence, and your Twitter seems to reveal an alarming animosity towards the Tigrayans. Do you feel that you've contributed to the violence, or when you've suggested that the Tigrayans who don't leave should eat rocks? Oh, you're muted, Mr. Pierce.
I expected this kind of question, and it's fitting that you put it so disingenuously, seeing as though I don't have animosity towards Tigrayans, but towards a terrorist group that started this war. I also noticed...
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Assassi.
I really have to say...
May I answer the question, please?
No, you may not.
No, you may not.
You're not recognized right now. Thank you, Mr. Pierce. Mr. Assassi is recognized. You have to wait your turn.
Obviously,
Mr.
this
Pierce.
witness has a very difficult time following simple instructions. You did advise him on several occasions that he can only speak when he has been recognized by you. That simple rule, this witness does not understand. But I have to say, the manner in which he testifies, the manner in which he is responding to our colleague here is truly obnoxious and should not be allowed, Mr. Chair. So if you could kindly warn him to keep his language and his decorum. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Sassi. And I will give a warning to you, Mr. Pierce. If this happens again, I'll have to ask you to not, you'll not be part of this witness panel any longer.
May I ask a question,
just
please?
no, you may not. And if you interrupt me one more time, you will be off this panel. Do you understand?
Yes, I'm leaving now. Goodbye.
Take
won't
care.
let me
Thank you
speak
for
and
joining
answer
us.
a question? Goodbye.
Mr. Chair, may I resume?
I think your witness has left, unfortunately, but you can resume with the other witnesses.
Yes. What's my time looking like right now?
You have another 2 minutes.
Okay.
So, my apologies. You have another 3 minutes. Go ahead.
3 minutes?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. To the Eritrean group that is here, 2 weeks ago, the Eritrean security arrested a Catholic bishop who had been vocal about violence and atrocities in Tigray. Do you know of this situation, and is this Catholic bishop still detained in Eritrea?
Thank you for your question. I do not speak for the government of Eritrea. I speak for the coalition of the Eritrean Canadian communities and association. We do follow closely the situation in Eritrea. I'm actually speaking to you now from Eritrea, inside Eritrea, where I have been since October the 5th. I would like, though, to, if you allow me, to first empathize with our Tigrayan brothers and sisters, particularly the lady that she did present this evening here. I do want to, though, to warn this committee that the massive defamation propaganda and the roots can give you a totally different direction as a committee as you're collecting this data. The genocide propaganda started on November 4th. So as the war had not started, the campaign of genocide had been preemptively started. I would humbly ask you to consider your information and see the pace and the path that this genocide accusation has started. In regards to the Eritrean implication to that, things will come up and become more clear in the future. Unfortunately, we do not have too much information at this time that the conflict is going on. There are two things that we would like you to consider, though.
Yeah.
First, the Ethiopian government had warned that 60,000 Eritrean uniforms were produced inside Tigray in order to fake Eritrean soldiers.
Thank you, Mr. Kyriakos.
You have another. You have 15 seconds.
15 seconds. All right. Just to the Security and Justice for Tigrayans group. Just wondering what role can the church play in Ethiopia to bring peace to the region?
We'll have to allow them to answer the next questioners. We'll continue on to Mr. Sidhu, please, for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope my voice is coming through loud and clear.
Very well.
I want to thank the witnesses for taking the time to be here with us this morning. And just really thank you for your insights and your courage to share some of your experiences. Back in 2021, Minister Joly, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, spoke with Ethiopia's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Demeke Mekonnen, to convey Canada's concerns regarding the rapidly deteriorating humanitarian situation and military escalation in the country. Moreover, I know Minister Joly urged for immediate actions by the government of Ethiopia to draw the conflict to a peaceful end. As well, recently on Tuesday, Prime Minister Trudeau spoke with Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed, about the ongoing conflict in northern Ethiopia. Prime Minister Trudeau called for immediate cessation of hostilities and implementations of measures to ensure unhindered access to humanitarian aid. The Prime Minister underscored the importance of African Union-led peace talks that began on that day in South Africa and heard Prime Minister Abiy and his commitment to engage his government in the negotiations. I'd like to ask Mr. ASFAW Asfaw what your thoughts are of the efforts made by the government of Ethiopia towards a peace process. I think his first name is Tahoot.
Sorry? Ms. Asfaw, you said? Not Mr. Asfaw. It's me? Okay.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I really appreciate that question. The Ethiopian government has started providing humanitarian services in the areas that they have taken back from the TPLF. And they are now currently working on providing services, electric services, banking services will resume very soon. So there are so many positive progresses that we are seeing and very encouraging. It's very unfortunate that it's the people that are suffering through this conflict, the people of Tigray, the people of Amhara, the people of Afar. And by working together, I'm sure there will be a solution to this problem. And currently what we have seen is there is an interest in the part of the government to continue to pursue and take back the places that are under TPLF siege, and they will continue to provide the services. That's what we have heard so far. I don't know if I have answered your question, but this is what we are seeing these days.
Thank you. And how do I pronounce your last name?
Asfa.
Okay.
Yes.
And Ms. Asfa, as you explained, the situation is quite complex. What do you see as a path to true reconciliation of the conflict, solutions, and kind of the path forward?
In my opinion, true reconciliation will come from within Ethiopia. We have social capital, we have faith-based institutions, we have relationships. I mean, one of the things I mentioned in the beginning is the ethnic-based policy that we have is what is dividing us. We are all intermarried. I have relationships in families within the Tigray community. I have relationships with other communities as well. And we all want to have peace. We all want to have a quick resolution. We don't want any mother to cry anymore. We don't want any children to be taken to war. That's what we are seeing. TPLF actually has been taking over young people and forcing families to give up their children to fight. And we don't want that to happen anymore. And I think the solution would come from within. And what I would recommend is to have a discussion, maybe national reconciliation. And Canada is where I think is also here. Canada can also help in facilitating this kind of discussion. And I'm sure solution will come from within, not from outside. That's my opinion.
Mr. Sidhu, you have less than 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. On Wednesday, Prime Minister Trudeau met with the chairperson of the African Union Commission, His Excellency Moussa Faki Mahamat, who has just completed his visit to Canada for the first high-level dialogue between Canada and the African Union Commission. Prime Minister Trudeau and Chairperson Faki discussed the situation in Ethiopia and in the Horn of Africa, security, and of course, humanitarian challenges in the Sahel, and the threat of terrorism and food insecurity across the continent. This question is for Dr. Abel Gede. Can you speak to how the ongoing conflict has affected food security in Tigray and the surrounding regions?
I was there since the start of the war, and Tigray was one of the regions which had better healthcare, and actually the whole part of Ethiopia we have had this problem of malnutrition as we are a developing country. So after the siege, before the siege, the prevalence of malnutrition and lack of basic food supply in the hospitals were almost 50%. But after the siege, all the children that were admitted to the referral hospital, to the primary referring hospital in the region was 100%. You can imagine, probably you have seen horrific pictures of children with malnutrition, horrific pictures of women with malnutrition. You can imagine, by the way, my medical doctor friends, they are out of salary for about 2 years. I had a chance of meeting one of friends, and he was through phone call from IDER, and he was telling me he cannot sustain life. He is a medical doctor, he's a subspecialist, he cannot sustain life. So the lack of food and basic services is an alarming rate. So the famine, as you have seen from the reports, 5.2 million are on the brink of famine. They cannot eat regular meal. They are eating plants, different plants, and if they can find one bread a day. So let alone the population, the general population, the people who are considered to be in the highest level, in the highest stratus of economic status, those are, they are starving to days. They are waiting for the 12.5 kg grains per month aid from the USAID.
Thank you. And we're going to continue to our next questioner, Monsieur Bernal Duceppe.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you to the witnesses who've gone to the trouble of coming here today for this extremely important study. I'll be quick because I have a lot of questions to ask you. Ms. Muligeta, how are you? Good morning. Data shows that there are 120,000 women raped in the first phase of the war. Can you refer to the status and plight of women in the second phase of the war in Tigray?
So, as Mr. Subdusep said, there's an estimated 120,000 Tigrayan women that have been heinously raped by the invading Eritrean forces, Amhara militia, and Ethiopian troops. Unfortunately, there aren't independent investigations ongoing on the ground, so the number could be even significantly higher, and it's going to get only worse in the second round of genocide that's happening currently on our watch, on all of your committees' watch. We implore you to be a voice for the women of Tigray. Back in April of 2021, the UNFPA had estimated over 25,000 women were going to seek help for rape, but that number has not been updated since. So it's from the Tigray Bureau of Health that they estimate over 120,000 women have been raped. And the rape that we've seen is just, it's the hallmark of the genocide, unfortunately. One woman, her name is Sanait, she was raped by multiple Eritrean troops, and then she was tied to a tree, and then when she woke up from her coma, she found her dead son below her feet. So it is the cruelty of the acts. It's not just, a side effect of war or a side effect of just happening random occurrences. This is a systematic, deliberate attempt to wipe out the people of Tigray and using Tigray's reproductive health as a system to eradicate them. As the women were being raped, they were being told they need to change their identities, that their bloodline needs to be purified, that a Tigrayan woman should not give birth. This has been well documented by various organizations such as the UN, the Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and so forth. So we implore Canada, having a feminist foreign policy, to use that to help the women of Tigray. They're relying on the international community to intervene as the federal government is not protecting them. So the second round of genocide that is starting now as the invading troops, the Eritrean troops, the Amhara militia, and the Ethiopian troops are back in Tigray. The women of Tigray are terrified. A lot of them, as you've seen in the previous testimony by Dr. Makunen, they have a lot of mental illnesses now because, understandably, of the trauma that they've been through. There's so much intergenerational trauma and trauma happening within the Tigrayan community and the Tigrayan women in particular, because their bodies have been used as a war place by the Ethiopian government. So we fear for our family, for our sisters, all our families in Tigray, and we implore on the Canadian government to please use the feminist foreign policy to actually stand up for it and use it.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kubeda. We just heard this. You worked at the hospital on site. Could you please describe the psychological and physical injuries of these women? Did you bear witness to this? And what was the physical and psychological ramifications?
It's very tough. Sometimes, like, there were actually terrible stories to hear. I had to come to stories where a woman were raped in front of her husband, that her husband was killed at the scene after they raped her, and her 2 children were looking at her. So there are, if you allow me to speak, by the way, I can speak the whole day with a bunch of stories. I have been hearing from fellow brothers and sisters that notifying TPLF. I'm not here representing TPLF. I'm here representing humanity. That's what I do for a living. Had this been occurring anywhere else outside of Tigray, I will stand with the side of humanity. So, I'm not here for a popularity speech. I'm not here to respond someone who is telling me you're representing some political party. I'm not a member of any political party. Just for your information, I was one of the physicians who was treating the Ethiopian National Defense Force and Eritrean army after they conquered Maqal. The injured troops, not only the people, even we couldn't find medical equipment, medical supplies, medicine to help the injured troops from both Eritrean army and Ethiopian National Defense Force. I urge the international community can do an independent research and investigation on the human violence. I believe the world is going to regret on what's happening in Tigray.
Merci.
I believe, because the whole region, 6 million people are starved to death. There is no medicine, there is no vaccination. You don't have to be smart enough to predict that the vaccine-preventable diseases that are eradicated from the world will definitely flourish in the next decade in Tigray. My daughter, who is most recently going to celebrate her 2nd birthday, haven't had a chance of getting vaccination. I'm telling you, I'm standing here, I'm not a politician, I'm not going to ask for a weapon. No. I'm going to ask for unfettered humanitarian access to Tigray for sake of humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we'll continue with our next questioner. I noticed some hands up on the screen. Please communicate with the clerk directly by email if you're having your hands up on screen. We recognize people based upon questions in this instance. Ms. McPherson, for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to say thank you so much for coming and telling your stories. I know how difficult this is to hear, so I can only imagine how difficult it is to share these stories. Ms. Arifanye, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what you've had to go through, and I honor the bravery that you are showing by being here and sharing that with us today. I would also like to ask that the letter that has been submitted to all members of this committee be submitted to the analysts to be part of this study. I also want to apologize again on behalf of this committee that the witnesses were invited. I am appalled by some of the members of the committee that they allowed witnesses to come and testify here in such an obnoxious and assaultive manner. I'm deeply sorry that you had to experience that. Mr. Kapila, I might start with you if I can. Can you tell me why there are still Eritrean troops present in Tigray?
Yes, I think the most likely reason is that the armed forces of Ethiopia are not strong enough to achieve a successful military outcome from their perspective in the conflict in and around Tigray. And this means they have to rely on the Eritrean military, who, as we know, have a long history of animosity towards the Tigrayans. So really, it's a combination of the two. And quite honestly, my suspicion is also from some military analysis that I do not think the Ethiopian military has the capacity to stop the Eritreans coming into the country. So it may well be that Abiy is calling upon the Eritreans for assistance in his military campaign against Tigray. But at the same time, I do not think the Ethiopians are strong enough to be able to hold the Eritreans away. Remember, they've had a serious conflict in the past, and it was more or less a stalemate for many, many, many years. So it's a combination of those kind of weakness of the Ethiopian military, as well as expediency on the part of the leadership of both countries against a common enemy, which is Tigray.
Thank you for that. And I guess, I recognize that this is a very complex issue, that is a very complex part of the world. And as Canadian parliamentarians, of course, our primary goal is to find what ways Canada can help, what we can do to stop the atrocities in Tigray. Of course, Ethiopia is a large recipient of Canadian aid, and we have had a long relationship with the people of Ethiopia. But knowing that there is a lack of access to humanitarian aid in Tigray, that food, medicine, banking, communications, all of these have been denied to the region of Tigray. What can Canada do right now to help stop the atrocities that we are seeing in Tigray?
Well, the first thing I should say, because you mentioned aid, and I speak as a former British government aid official also from experience, when one encounters inhumanity, best way to counter inhumanity is through humanity. So I would like to suggest that the generous government of Canada should not consider reducing aid to Ethiopia, because the quarrel is not with the general population of Ethiopia. It is with certain segments who are being manipulated by their government authorities and some state authorities in that area. But Canadian aid should be targeted. It should be targeted towards humanitarian assistance, but there should be no conditionality placed on it, other than that it should be going towards the benefit of those who need that. So food, for example, and of course climate change and drought and all those external factors don't help the Horn of Africa. So having said that, coming to your main question, I would say that it is extremely important that you complete your study as parliamentarians, you come to your determination, and like you did with the case of the Uyghurs in China, if you are convinced by the arguments presented to you and your own researches, then you could make a suitable declaration in relation to the war in Tigray. Is it genocide? Is it not? I assert it is, but it is something that you will have to come to your own conclusions in that regard. The second thing you can do is also to talk to the judicial authorities in Canada and urge, as I was saying earlier in my talk, in my earlier evidence, that genocide and other crimes against humanity are crimes of universal jurisdiction. It's open to Canadian courts, and to be able to actually investigate that. Germany's already done that. In Germany, for example, some Syrian perpetrators of crimes against humanity have come before German courts. And we have the situation where West African, Gambia, I believe, has taken the government of Myanmar to the International Court of Justice. So there are legal approaches. You know, there are also many, many suffering Ethiopians and Tigrayans and Eritreans and so on in Canada. Many of them have become Canadian nationals also. Now, it should be open to the victims of this genocidal violence to seek compensation in the courts of Canada. There is nothing more concentrating the mind than to actually sue, identify the people who are committing these atrocities, sanction them from entering, and seize their assets through targeted sanctions approaches. And then the victims, who are many of them Canadian residents and Canadian citizens, to seek compensation and some compensation for this. So there are measures that can be taken. Finally, I think Canada could take a much more robust position at the United Nations. You know, we are paralyzed by the Security Council. We all know that. But that is why more and more of the action has shifted to the General Assembly. And so I think Canada can do more of a diplomatic role in the multilateral circles than it is doing at the moment, in the way you're doing in Ukraine, for example.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. And within 7 minutes sharp. Now we'll continue for 5 minutes with Mr. Assassi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Allow me to thank Professor Kapila for his moving testimony, Dr. Kebedom, Ms. Arafayan, Ms. Mulugeta. Thank you very, very much. I know it's been difficult to testify, but I thank you. Now, first question, if I may, if I could start with Mr. Kyriakos. Mr. Kyriakos, as you know, over the course of the last month, if not more, the international community has sought to see Eritrea withdraw its troops from the Tigray region. What is your reaction to that demand by the international community?
It's a very understandable question. It's always, though, inappropriate and not well understood in the Western media, because the main component of Eritrea's act of self-defense is not understood properly. If Eritrea...
Thank you very much. I just wanted to know if you're in favor of that demand or not. It seems that you're not, sir. Now, if we could go to Ms. Asfa. Thank you for having provided some context. But you would agree and admit that the Ethiopian government can do a much better job to make sure that humanitarian assistance is delivered to Tigrayans. Is that correct?
Yes, I would agree, because the situation, as mentioned, is very complex. They have tried in the past to give access to, or to provide access to NGOs to get into those conflict areas, to provide humanitarian
But there's more that can be
support.
done. Is that correct?
There is always, of course, it's a very complex situation. I would agree, definitely. If you have a follow-up question, I would.
And you would agree also that Ethiopian troops have committed atrocities over the course of the past 10 months.
I mean, with all due respect for the testimonies that we have heard, and definitely I would agree that in every conflict situation, there will always be unintended outcomes.
Okay, but you would agree that Ethiopian troops have
If I
committed...
don't, I would be lying, because it's a conflict, and it's expected that unintended outcomes would definitely happen.
Thank you. Because as you know, there's a UN Commission of Human Rights Experts have issued a report, and we do know that atrocities have been happening, in particular in Merkel.
And maybe on that note, I can mention, if you allow me.
I'm so sorry, I need to share my time with
yeah.
my colleague. But and there is obstruction of humanitarian access and terrible atrocities happening. But Mr. Chair, I'd like to share the remainder of my time with Ms. Vandenberg.
Yes, thank you very much. I wish that we had more time to speak with you, but I think it's been said in this committee, we are on the side of humanity, and I think all of us will agree that that is exactly why we're here. And what I've heard is it isn't the combatants that are being targeted, it is civilians. Ms. Arafaini, your family and the story that you told about your family. These are civilians that are being targeted. These are people's mothers and fathers and uncles and brothers and sisters. And I was very moved by Dr. Kebedom and Ms. Mulugeta about the moved is the wrong word, horrified by the sexual violence you described. My question to you is, particularly Dr. Kebedom, would you say that the sexual violence that is occurring is being deliberately used as a weapon of war?
Actually, I would definitely say, because if you have asked me to tell you some of the stories, I've been hearing to a lot of stories. So the perpetrators were telling they were not only committing the sexual violence, they were telling them that they have to purify the Tigrayan blood. So they told for example, let me tell you one story. There was this lady, she's a breast cancer survivor. She was raped by 8 Eritrean men. She was hearing all what they were saying up until the 4th man. After that, like she briefly lost her consciousness, and she spoke to me. She told me that you are cursed people, so we have to purify your blood. You fought us with Ethiopia, and then you made us get starved and made Eritrea put Eritrea under sanction for several years by combining with the Ethiopians. So we have to. They were telling a lot of insults, which I cannot mention them here. So it's not. She was not the only one. I remember stories. I remember one lady. She was raped in front of her 2 children, and her husband was killed in front of her children. And she was raped by the combination of Amhara militia and Ethiopian National Defense Force. She was told she's from Humera. She was told this part of Western Tigray was ours. You are invaders. So it was clearly used as a weapon of war.
Thank you, Dr. Kebedom. We'll continue now to our next questioner, Mr. Abul Tayev, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the witness for appearing today. It's a very complicated situation, and in this case, what begs the question is where the peace, and how can we do that to make sure we at least stop this horrible and the horrific actions that's been taken against women and children and innocent people, which is some of the stories, we can only feel, but we can never imagine what people there have been going through at all levels of atrocities and crimes and human rights abuses and so forth. But the question I'd like to direct it to Ms. Asfa, and I would love for Professor Kapila to weigh on it. So given the mistrust in the region, how can there be any sort of lasting peace, knowing that the peace negotiation is going in South Africa at the moment? And I would like to hear from both, as again, Ms. Asfa and Professor Kapila on this question. Thank you.
To build trust again, definitely will take a lot of work, but there has to be the desire to come to the table and discuss all the issues, what led us to the place where we are at right now. Conflict or war doesn't happen overnight. There has been a lot of issues that have been brewing under the surface, including the ethnic division, the politicization of identity, and all of that has to be addressed. And my recommendation would be for the government to take a bold step to look at the Constitution and see where the fault lines are. But in addition to that, I think all Ethiopian people, everyone, Tigray, Amhara, all the different regions, we have to be willing to sit at the table and discuss our issues and resolve them based on discussion and also the thinking that unless we deal with it, this will be a problem that will pass to the next generation, to our children in the next generation. So we have to deal with it. Even now, having this discussion here, it's not, as my brother said, it's not to score a point. It's not to show who is hurt more. If we do that, and if we start, for example, talking about what's happening in Amhara and in Afar regions, the same atrocities have been committed. And I know my brother said don't mention TPLF, but the reason why we are in this situation right now is because of TPLF, a group that has been in power for 27 years. And now they still have control over a lot of these apparatuses. So the first thing in my recommendation would be to disarm TPLF and to allow a peaceful discussion and resolution of these differences that are leading to further bloodshed and further destruction.
Thank you. Dr. Capella?
On the matter of peacekeeping, I've written about it. I'm monitoring the talks in Pretoria. And here's what I have learned really about peace talks, having spent, I don't know, countless hours in conference rooms in peace talks around the world. Number one, it's the little steps that make a difference towards a bigger peace. So my worry is that the troika of 3 senior African leaders, if they put too much pressure on the two sides, sure, they'll sign a piece of paper. But, you know, I remember I've sat through so many peace talks where paper after paper has been signed under external pressure, French pressure in Cote d'Ivoire, British pressure in Sierra Leone, et cetera, and never got anywhere, right? So it's important that is to take the small steps first. Second thing I would say is trust comes not from talking about trust, but taking actions on the ground that build that trust. Well, by that I mean, and here again, I say this is a very bizarre process going on in South Africa. I've never come across a peace process, at least in the recent 20, 30 years of my experience, where peace talks have been going on while fighting has been going on the ground. Usually what happens is you cease fighting and then you come around the table. Now, here what we have is, thanks to the efforts of our American friends, and this is to be commended, by the way, they have brought the two sides together, and South Africa has provided a generous table, and the African Union has finally woken up to all this. All good, all good, all good. But I think unless we have some confidence-building measures taken on the ground, for example, the cessation of fighting, and for example, letting humanitarian aid go through, we're not going to have peace on the ground. So my conclusion is that if at the end of this week, on Sunday, the Tigrayan side and the Ethiopian side are still talking, and they extend the talks, or if they agree to meet again, that would have been a victory. So let's not expect too much. Let us just wish them well to carry on talking, and then I hope peace will eventually come.
Thank you. And we'll continue to our next witness, Mr. Boudinel-Tussep.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Mr. Gibraltar Adrian, I'm sorry I mispronounced your name earlier, but I'd like to understand what recommendations the committee should submit to the House of Commons concerning the situation in Tigray.
Thank you, Mr. Boudinel-Tussep. I appreciate your question. Before answering your question, I really want to respond one thing. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Please proceed.
There is some kind of blaming the victim is going on in front of this committee. The people of Tigray are facing unprecedented atrocities. Who is terrorist? Is that the government who is really blocking basic services, putting his own region under siege? To me, this is a state terrorism. This is a government that invited foreign force to attack his own people. And that is really, for me, I see it as the government or the prime minister is really, I've never seen such a prime minister who invites a foreign force to kill his own people, to starve his own people. So to me, and also I just want to mention, the Central Command, military command, is now stationed in Asmara, not in Addis Ababa. So who is leading, who is ruling Ethiopia is President Isaias Afwerki. Having said that, I think what I'm proposing for this committee is that we are appealing to use all Canada to use all its leverage at its disposal to pressure on the Ethiopian government to accept cessation of hostility immediately. The second thing is we appeal Canada to use its leverage to pressure the Eritrean government to withdraw its forces from Tigray immediately, without which peace is not possible. Canada has moral and legal obligation to pressure the Ethiopian government to allow unfettered humanitarian access to Tigray, because people are dying as we speak. People are dying of starvation. People are dying of drone airstrike. People are really taken to a concentration camp, to unknown locations. So that's what the reality is. I think there was one thing that I would like to respond also, and that is and that is they were talking about recommending Canada to send a delegate to visit, but the International Human Rights Commission experts are not allowed to Tigray, to enter Tigray. So the last recommendation I'm making is appeal Canada, along with the international community, to sanction arms embargo to Ethiopia and Eritrea. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Do I have a moment left? 45 seconds. Yes, Mr. Kapi, you said that Canada was a signatory on the Convention on Genocide. What are the obligations under that convention, Professor, when one is a signatory of a convention on genocide on 48, and that there's a current risk of genocide already being underway? What are the obligations?
Mr.
Kapila, sir?
I think your question was, what are the
in 30 seconds
obligations when genocide is suspected, correct?
Oui, exactement.
Yes, that's correct. What are signatories' obligations, signatories to the UN Convention on Genocide?
Just a sentence or two, please.
Yeah. Well, the convention is very clear in that if a genocide is suspected, a member state that is party to the convention has to do everything it can to stop it. The question, of course, is how and why, and that's why this enormous debate. Also, it is an issue why states are reluctant to declare genocide, simply because by declaring that, they are going to be under an obligation which they cannot fulfill. So we have a conundrum here. This is why practical measures are needed, which are not fixated on the word genocide alone, but are concerned about crimes against humanity, about humanity in generally, and those other practical measures that will reduce some of the ways in which the Ethiopian and Eritrean parties are conducting this warfare on Tigray.
Thank you, Mr. Kapila. Ms. McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank our witnesses again for being here. As I think everybody in this room has expressed, what we want to see is the the cessation of loss of life and the stopping of attacks on the Tigrayan people, the stopping of the violence against the Tigrayan people. And just last week, the Secretary General for the United Nations spoke about two things that were vital for that to happen. The first thing was the UN chief said that there must be, and I quote, an immediate withdrawal and disengagement of Eritrean armed forces from Ethiopia, adding that civilians were paying a horrific price across the region, and that that all parties must allow and facilitate the rapid and unimpeded passage of humanitarian relief for all civilians in need. Those are the two things that the Secretary General has identified as the primary things. And I know that you've had an opportunity to talk a little bit with us about other things that Canada can do. Do you agree? I'll ask all three of you if you wouldn't mind. Do you agree if this is the things that are most urgently required? Perhaps I could start with you, Mr. Gebrehimnan.
Thank you, Mrs. McPherson. I appreciate the question. I think the important thing to do for Canada to do is to pressure the government of Ethiopia to agree for an immediate cessation of hostility. And the second thing is that people have access to humanitarian aids, because people are dying of starvation. And it's really unfortunate. The international community said that never again, but it's happening again and again. And it's really, the people of Tigray are waiting, to have a very concrete kind of action to stop the war so that people can have access to life-saving basic services, their banking services, telephone, everything is now. We don't have any access to our brothers and sisters over there. My brother was killed, and I did not have access to know how and when he was killed. The only thing I heard was he was killed and he was buried after 1 week. Why? Because people were not allowed to bury him. So I think what else do we really need to call it genocide? While we see people are really starving of this, people are really being, women as 13 years of old girls are being raped. They are doing it right now. In Shire, right now, they've occupied Shire. A lot of women are being raped over there. More than 300 people have been taken to a location, to unknown location. So it is really, I think the world must act now, not later. Thank you.
I would agree that the removal of Eritrean troops is needed immediately. In addition to that, the removal of the Mahara militia and the Ethiopian troops that have committed these atrocities. And then also, as you mentioned, the unfettered humanitarian access piece. Hunger, it kills exponentially. The starvation, the images that we're seeing of the malnourished children, the UNICEF said over 100,000 children are imminent risk of dying from malnutrition. The UN has called numerous times that over 5.6 million people are in imminent risk of famine. So we need Canada to use all the tools it has to sanction Ethiopia, use all the leverage it has to pressure it to provide unfettered humanitarian access.
I would definitely underline the unfettered humanitarian access should be allowed, not tomorrow, not the day after tomorrow, but now. As we speak, people are dying. If you have seen on Twitter, there were children gasping due to lack of oxygen. So they can't wait. Children of Tigray can't wait. Women of Tigray can't wait. As a human being, the things that are happening in Tigray give a very bad repercussion worldwide. So I believe, for sake of humanity, The war has to stop, has to end as soon as possible.
And that will be the final word.
Mr. Chair, I have a proposed motion.
A motion?
Yes, I understand that as employees of the House of Commons and we as MPs have access to employee assistance program counseling services. As a committee, we have the ability to provide those services to witnesses of a particular study on a one-time basis. I would move that we allow witnesses of this study to access those counseling services available through the House of Commons.
Thank you for putting that to the floor. For expediency, I would ask that we have unanimous consent around that. Do we all agree? Yes, great. So all witnesses here have access to the services that Ms. Vanderbilt just outlined. Our clerk will be in direct contact with all witnesses here, and please avail yourself of it. I've heard that they're very good. Please don't hesitate. Do avail yourself of it. It takes a lot of courage to do so, but at the worst, it can be do nothing. At the best, it can be helpful. So please do avail yourself of this service, free service. We have now heard, we've now reached our limit of time. I want to sincerely thank all the witnesses for being here. I know it's extremely difficult to share your personal experiences, the experiences of your family and loved ones and friends. Please know that you have been heard. And this is extremely important, everything you have said. It takes a lot of strength and courage to come here today and to do what you've done. We recognize that. We applaud you for what you're doing. Please stay in contact with us. Don't not be in touch. And we have to, unfortunately, continue with our business. This place works like clockwork. It doesn't stop for us. We must continue and move ahead. We will go into closed session. We have about 5 minutes to switch to that. For those online, I ask you to quickly move into closed session. I want to thank the witnesses also for for coming in today, taking your time, participating by Zoom. A sincere thank you. We are adjourned. Suspended. We're suspended.
you.